Okay, we just have 2 more types of greens to paint before we're ready to paint a wreath. So to start, I'm gonna do cedar. And this is cedar from my yard. I picked it and I'm gonna look at it to do a little sketch here. If you don't have cedar in your yard, that's great. You could take a look at mine or you could go pick some. If you have the thing you wanna paint close by, it makes it easier to paint it, I think. So look at this sketchbook page. It's kind of a mess. And that's because I closed my book too early. So some red paint from the other page got on it. This is like something was rubbing on it, I'm not sure. But I think it's gonna be just fine for practicing these greens. Let's talk about materials before I start. I have watercolor paper. Mine's in this big sketchbook. You might have loose pieces. You might have a smaller sketchbook like this. You might have something really big. You might just have regular old paper, like from your computer printer, and that's fine too. The difference is computer paper is so thin that the paper will get really rumply and bumpily as it dries, and also the paints won't really mix together very well on that paper. On thicker paper, you can mix colors, you can paint on top of colors, and you can kind of change the way your painting looks. And the paper stays mostly flat, and it really absorbs the paint nicely. But for practicing, you could use whatever paper you have close by. So paper, pencil, I have my paints. I have a cup of water. This is yesterday's, it's still very green. I have 2 brushes, and this is a number 6, a size 6, and this is a size 2, and it's my favorite brush, and I use it for pretty much everything. And so for these tiny little short cedar needles and for the branch, I'll probably just use this small brush. You could use a bigger brush for sure and just try and use the point of it. Someone else I know is doing all of these painting tutorials with colored pencils. That's a great idea. You could sharpen your pencils and get a nice fine point. You know what else? You could use watercolor pencils if you wanted to. You can do the whole drawing and then add water to it. So many choices. Where were we? I have something to mix paints in. And this piece of cedar is almost all one color, but I'm still gonna mix 2 shades of green for it. And I'll probably have a little bit of brown also. So this is yesterday's palette. It has 3 colors of green. Before we paint, it would be good if you took time to mix at least 2 colors. And the way that you could do that is to get green from your palette, dark green or light green, whatever green you have, and get some of that into a space where you can mix it. You could use the lid. Can you see this? The lid of your paint container. Mine has a lot of old colors that have been mixed there, but you can just use a sponge or a paper towel and wash those off if you need more space. You could use a little palette like this. You could use the lid of a plastic container or even a plate if there's a plate that is okay to get paint on. So mix some green from your palette with a little bit of yellow, and that'll make a nice bright green. And then mix some green with a little bit of brown, and that'll just make it a little bit darker. And then this brown that I have, this is brown and black. Mixed together, it's mostly brown with just a little bit of black. You might just want a little bit of that. And that's all. I have a sponge because my brush holds on to water, and so I like to kind of dry it off so I don't get a big water droplet on my paper. And so I think we're ready. If you don't have paints ready, this is a good time to push pause until you have your paints totally mixed up. I'm gonna get mine wet again so I can see what colors they are and see if I need to adjust. So I need more yellow in mine. I'm gonna do that now. My yellow is already kind of greenish, probably because I've dipped a not clean brush into my yellow a few too many times. Now it looks a little bit brown, so I'm gonna put a little more of this darker green in. See what happens. Okay. I think I'm ready. So one thing I'm noticing about cedar, and I've painted something that I called cedar before, but now that I have it right here in front of me, I'm noticing that there's a single stem to this branch, and then there's these smaller ones going off in both sides, and they're not always right across from each other. Look at that. This one has two, and this just has one, and then this and here. But also, most of this stem, the first half of it, these needles are only going up. There aren't any coming down until we get about halfway up. So I'm gonna paint it like that. I'm gonna try and paint it close to how it is on this branch right in front of me. So with my pencil, I'm just gonna draw this shape. If you wanted to use your pencil and draw a few of these small branches coming out, then you could. If it's easier to draw it first, then definitely do it. I already started, so I guess I'll draw mine too. There it is. So I'm gonna use the lighter green for everything, and then I'm gonna add some darker afterwards. So I'm gonna start by painting this whole line. And if you can't see my pencil line, then you could watch this part and then pause it and draw if you want. Or maybe you're looking at a branch from your own yard, or you're looking at this branch on my video and you can do your own sketch. So by now you know that the harder you push down on your brush, the more pressure you put on it, the thicker the line is gonna be, no matter what size brush you have. So even with this thin brush, I could still make a pretty thick line if I wanted to. Where's my scratch paper? Is it? This one. So I can make all kinds of thicknesses of lines here. Really thin, a little bit thicker, a little bit more, and I could use the whole brush to make a thick line. And that's why I like this brush. It has a good point. I can make the skinniest little line if I just barely touch it down. So this branch is pretty delicate. So I'm trying to only put a little bit of pressure and push down just a smidge. Okay, now I'm gonna work on the needles. And I'm gonna start on this left-hand side so that I don't have to put my hand on my own painting as I go. So just like I was talking about before, I'm gonna just put the first few needles going straight up. And they're curved a little bit, I guess. And then I'll start doing side to side. And there's one sticking out of the end of each one. There's an extra needle at the very tip. Oops, I was supposed to not do one right there, wasn't I? Oh well. I think I need one more right in here. And I think maybe right here too. Okay, as we get closer to the top now, it's almost just one needle on each side, isn't it? So I'm gonna make this a branch still. And then I'm gonna put needles, these needles coming out. Okay, I can see the places that have dried very light. And so I'm gonna use my darker green. And this one is green with a little bit of brown. And I'm just gonna put a couple more needles on. Actually, look at that. That does not look very dark. I'm gonna have to add a little more brown, and I just did a tiny bit of black too. I just don't want it to be this like really bright emerald green. I want it to be something just a little bit darker. And then that lighter color kind of looks like the needles in the background. The darker is closer to us. I'm still gonna make that a little bit darker. The darker is closer, the lighter is in the background. Just kind of fun. Okay, I'm also putting a little bit of this at the place where each one of these branches off. And also, let me see if I can hold this close enough without it getting blurry. All along this stem, there's these little barbs almost. I'm gonna just do a couple of those with the darker color. Like, kind of like this, almost like needles that haven't totally gotten expanded yet, like they haven't branched off yet. And if you've ever picked cedar before with your bare hands, you'll know that sometimes those are a little bit sharp. Okay, now I'm just gonna use a really small bit of brown right down at the bottom. And I'm just gonna touch a little bit of it in along the middle part of this branch. And that is done, that's cedar. We will do this, something like this fir branch next.